from Iowa, Mr. Blum, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Russell. And Mr. Dodaro, good to see you again. Thank you for being here. Shortly after I was elected 3 years ago, I held a town hall back in Iowa, and I was explaining what committees I was on. And I mentioned that I was on Oversight Committee, and that our job was to investigate and bring some daylight to waste, fraud, and abuse. And an elderly farmer raised his hand, and he said, waste, fraud, and abuse. Aren't those the three branches of government? True story, but not because of your department, that is for sure. There's a lot of cynicism out there, is my point, and for the most part, it's well-deserved. I come from the private sector, and in the private sector, failure is penalized. Failure is penalized. However, in Washington, D.C., in the swamp here, there is no penalty for failure. Would you agree with that?
Not completely. I do think, a number of people are removed or lose their job over time, perhaps not as many as should, and some agencies are forced to take action when they need to, but by and large, the incentives are not aligned properly to reinforce proper behavior and penalize inappropriate behavior or inefficiencies or waste. So I agree with you with some exceptions.
Yeah, that was one of my comments, was the incentives in this town seem to be perverse to me. For example, what incentive is there for a government employee or an agency to save taxpayers' money? What incentive is there? Is there any today?
What we do is prevail upon people's commitment to public service and to be good stewards. The reward systems, like for example at GAO, I reward our people based upon what we're able to do to save people money, save taxpayers money. So there has to be a good reward system in place to do that. It doesn't exist throughout the federal government, though.
In the private sector, if you save the company $1 million, you probably get a percentage of that. You get some large bonus, and well worth it. Do we have that? I don't think we have that in the federal government, but what if we did? Is that an idea worth exploring?
Yeah, definitely. I think there should be positive reward systems in place, and theoretically, the performance management systems in agencies should do that.
Should.
They should.
Should. Do
right.
they? Do they?
I'm not positive in all cases. It's at the level of what you would expect. I'm most familiar with our own, and I know at GAO it works that way, but I'm not sure I could say that about the rest of the federal agencies and departments. And I think you need we've said that some of the performance management approaches in the federal government, the civil service system is outdated. It's not aligned properly with modern compensation systems, modern classification systems, and needs revamped. And that could certainly be part of that revamping.
Let's go to 60,000 feet, if we could, for the last minute 50 that I have. Let me ask you this question. Do you feel that our agencies are being held accountable? Do you feel that the management in those agencies are being held accountable and that the employees in those agencies are being held accountable? And if you're going to say somewhat, give me a grade. Where are we at? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Because the federal government's getting so big, seriously, I question if it can be managed anymore.
Yeah, I definitely think it could be managed. I think we're not, some agencies better than others, okay? But by and large, I think that much more could be done to hold the agencies accountable. And I think this is, Congress's responsibility. I think there needs to be more oversight hearings. I've said this a number of times. Where we see positive change, we see the Congress's hand has to be in this area. And that, to me, is very important. Now, we work also with OMB to try to create change within the executive branch, and I meet with the heads of departments and agencies as well to try to institute their change. But really, the best incentives I've seen to hold people accountable over the years are good, rigorous congressional oversight. That will produce change, with or without legislation, I might add.
So some folks back in Iowa comment, boy, OGR, you hold some great hearings. Really good stuff, tough questions. What happens after that?
Yeah, there's not enough.
What happens after the tough questions?
There's not enough follow-up. There's not enough follow-up.
How do we change that?
Yeah, I think you have to be clear. I've been involved in some things over the years where there are a series of hearings. You know, I remember in the Senate when initially we were having questions about the personnel security clearances were behind, that were not being done timely. They held hearings there was either a quarter or every 6 months. So there was a series. People knew from the agencies that it wasn't like, gee, I got to get through this hearing and it's going to be over with. They'll forget about it. They had follow-up hearings. You had follow-up meetings with the agency officials. GAO can help in the follow-up activities as well. So there has to be a commitment to follow through until you know that the problem's solved. And it's not just bringing...
That's where we're weak, I think.
Yeah, that's where, yeah, I agree. I mean, Congress does a good job at shining a light, but then as soon as the light goes away, the problem doesn't get much better.
My time's expired, but hats off to you from the lone voice from the private sector. I think you're doing an amazing job. Your agency does an amazing job, and I, for one, am so glad that you're here today.
No, thank you very much, Congressman.
I yield back the time I do not have.